Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Thank you so much for tuning into this video on converting fractions and decimals. So by now you should know that fractions and decimals represent part of a number. They're different ways to represent the same number. For example, you probably know that half and 0.5 have the same value. They are essentially the same thing. Different ways to represent numbers. Some people find it easier visualizing numbers as fractions, some find easier working with decimals. Either way, it doesn't matter. What we're going to do though is we're going to look at how we can take a fraction like this and get to its decimal form, and how we can take a decimal form and get to its fraction form. So I'll do after the other. I'll start with what I think is easier, and that's going from decimals to fractions. So these are the 3 steps you take when I give you a decimal and you want to make it into a fraction. So they probably don't make a lot of sense, these steps, at the moment, but I'll show you an example and hopefully it'll become a lot clearer. So let's say, for example, I have the decimal 0.45. I want to change it to a fraction. So remember, a fraction has a numerator. So N for numerator goes on top and D for denominator goes on the bottom, okay? So these 2 steps are telling you how to find what the numerator will be and how to find what the denominator will be. So step 1, numerator. So I write this number without the decimal point. So I write 0.45 with no decimal point. Of course, you probably realize that I don't need to write the 0. So I'm just going to rub that out and just write the number 45. So 45 is the numerator of this fraction. So denominator, I find the lowest place value in the decimal, which is always the last column on the right of the decimal. So this one here. So 5 is in the last column of the decimal. It also has the lowest place value. So remember, for place value, we have this column here, which has nothing in it, would be tens, and then it goes ones, and then just after the decimal point, you have tenths, and this one here, the 5, is in the hundredths column. So you can see hundreds on the bottom of the fraction. So I put 100 on the bottom of my fraction there, because the last number in the decimal point, after the decimal point, that is in the hundredths column. So I put 100 on the bottom of my fraction. So I've done the first 2 steps. 0.45 is the same as 45 over 100. Now I just simplify if I can. I can simplify because 5 goes into 45 and also goes into 100. So 45 divided 5 is 9, 100 divided 5 is 20. So 0.45 and 9 over 20 have the same value. They're the same thing. I've now converted a decimal to a fraction. Now I'll do one more example really quickly. So let's say I want to do 0.36. So again, the lowest place value here is 100. So 100 goes on the bottom. I write the number without a decimal point as the numerator, and then I simplify if necessary. So 36 and 100 are both divisible by 4. So I divide 36 by 4 and 100 by 4. And I end up with 9 over 25. And I'm done. I have converted a decimal to a fraction. Now let's look at going the other way. Okay, so converting a fraction to a decimal is a little bit trickier, and I'm going to go through 2 ways that you can do this. So the first way involves finding an equivalent fraction whose denominator is a power of 10. Remember, a power of 10 is like 10, 100, 1,000. It's just a 1 with a whole heap of zeros. And then I use place value to turn it into a decimal. So that's the first method. Second method involves short division. You can choose whichever method you like. Let's look at an example. So let's have the fraction 7 over 20, and I want to turn that into a decimal. So I'm going to start with the first method. I'm going to find an equivalent fraction whose denominator is a power of 10. Now remember, the golden rule for equivalent fractions, what you do to the top, you must also do to the bottom. What you do to the bottom, you must do to the top. So what I'm going to do is find an equivalent fraction. I'm going to times the top and the bottom of the fraction by the same number, so that the bottom number, the denominator, becomes a power of 10, 100, 1,000, or whatever. So I can't times 20 by a whole number to get 10, right? So that's out of the picture. So let's go to the next power of 10. Can I times 20 by something to get 100? Well, yes, I can. I can times 20 by 5, and it will become 100, which is a power of 10. So I must also times the top by 5. So 7 times 5 is 35. 20 times 5 is 100. So I've now got it as a power of 10. So this number is 35 hundredths. So my decimal, if I put the decimal point there, is going to have two numbers after it, tenths and hundredths. So I'm just going to write the numerator, 35. 3 tenths, and 5 hundredths. So 0.35 is the decimal form of 7 over 20. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to get it using the short division algorithm. So note that 7 over 20 is the same as 7 divided by 20, because this fraction line here means divide. Another way you can say that is how many times does 20 go into 7? Okay, now what we do when we're doing this, because 20 doesn't go into 7 one time, what we do is put our decimal point right as 7.0, because 7 and 7.0 are the same thing. So how many times does 20 go into 7? 0. So then I treat this as the number 70. So how many times does 20 go into 70? It goes in 3 times, because 3 times 20 is 60, and there's a remainder of 10. So I put another 0 here, remainder of 10. So now I say how many times does 20 go into 100? It goes in 5 times. It's always important when I'm doing this that I put the decimal point above the decimal point. And when 20 goes into 100, there is no remainder, so I can stop. I'm going to do another example using both methods very quickly. So let's say I want to do 3 over 8. I want to convert that into a decimal. So 8 doesn't go into 10. It doesn't go into 100. So I can't use those powers of 10. But it does go into 1,000. 8 goes into 1,000 125 times. So I times that by 125, and I must do the same to the top. So I end up with 3 times 125. 8 times 125, which is 1,000. Okay, now it becomes pretty easy. So I have 375 1,000ths. So when I'm writing this as a decimal, I know that there's going to be 3 numbers, because I'm going to the thousandths column. 3 numbers after the decimal point. So I just write those 3 numbers, 3, 7, 5. Okay, so 3 over 8 is 0.375. Now I'll show you how to do it using short division. So again, it's 3 divided by 8, or how many times does 8 go into 3? So 8 doesn't go into 3 at all. So what we do, put the decimal point, and we can put some zeros here. So 8 goes into 3 0 times, decimal point above decimal point. So it goes 0, but there's a remainder of 3. So how many times does 8 go into 30? It goes 3, remainder 6. How many times does 8 go into 60? It goes 7, remainder 4. Now how many times does 8 go into 40? It goes exactly 5 times. And I have the same answer, 0.375. So use whichever method you find the easiest. Hope you've enjoyed this video. This has been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Have a great day.